Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great honor and privilege that I introduce to you my long-standing friend, mentor, and colleague, Dr. Thomas Krummel. Thomas served as APSA's 45th president for the past year. Like many of the esteemed presidents who preceded him, he's worked hard to enhance the value of membership in our wonderful society. A partial list of accomplishments include creating the inaugural Robert E. Gross Award, identifying a potentially huge problem for our field, the ever-expanding workforce, and thus commissioning a rigorous workforce study, and he also brought the Expert CME project to fruition, to name a few. Before handing the podium over to Tom, I'd like not only to introduce Tom, the pediatric surgeon, but Tom, the husband to Susie, the father to Katie, Maggie, and Allie, son to Jim and Helen, the entrepreneur, mentor, athlete, and I believe a true role model. I'd like to title this introduction, The Quest for Balance and Excellence. Tom's roots are in a small town called Racine, Wisconsin. He's the oldest of four in a close and loving family whose parents lived through the Depression. He never strayed from the values imparted by his surroundings and family. His upbringing left him with many indelible lessons by which he has led his personal and professional lives. 3 examples of those lessons are as follows. Number 1, and this is what he got from his parents having lived through the Depression: make do and find joy in less. Number 2, say what you mean what you say. And number 3, under-promise, over-deliver, always. His family and self-imposed broad and high expectations were played out early in life in the following ways. His first job was at age 10, and he's never stopped working since. Even at an early age, he was striking a balance between academic excellence, athletic excellence on the golf course and on the ski slopes, and discovery. And discovery was heralded in many interesting ways. He built everything from go-karts, tree houses, ski bindings, high jump apparatus, tree swings, an archery lane in the garage, rabbit hutches, all with free reign of Dad's toolbox. He put himself through college working as a janitor, a job replete with trash, ashtrays, and toilet swabbing. One office he cleaned every day for 4 years had a big sign: "Be grateful for your problems, it's what we pay you for." That sign forever left an impression on Tom. Tom was a chemistry major and physical education minor at the University of Wisconsin and hung out with what looked like a 60s rock band, but they were simply the Pre-Med Society. I challenge you to pick Tom out in this picture. Not everything came easy to Tom. He struggled in his first 2 years of medical school at the Medical College of Wisconsin, probably because he was too busy posing for Study Picture of the Year photo ops, like the one pictured here. How in the world did you get a picture like this? It's outstanding. But he shined in the second 2 years, actually functionally doing an internship in cardiac surgery, putting patients on pump, and he spent 3 months vacation between semesters being a first responder in the CVICU, mainly because he was galvanized by the simple hands-on aspect of cardiac surgery and surgery in general. Tom received his general surgery training at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Here is a great example of ingenuity and quest for discovery as a PGY 2 and 3. Tom formed the second ECMO team in the world. It was comprised of 2 perfusionists, both of whom were dog lab techs, and a NICU nurse, Susie, pictured here, whom he would shortly thereafter wed. Tom went on to pediatric surgery fellowship at Pittsburgh and was trained by many giants in the field: Mark Ravitch, Mark Rowe, Bill Sieber, Gene Weiner. During that grueling fellowship, Katie was born, a bright spot in the every other night call rotation. And although both groups tried to recruit him in 1985, he decided to return to MCV to work with the late and great Arnie Salzberg. During his early years at MCV, Tom was intrigued by the wound healing discoveries of the fetal surgery team at UCSF and spent several months in the Mike Harrison lab. He went on to combine this training with a world-class college and biology lab and acquired NIH funding 3 years later. His clinical and academic productivity resulted in a meteoric rise in the academic ranks as he was promoted to associate professor in year 4, followed by the birth of Maggie and Allie in that year, and then the position of division chief. Tom quickly then moved to Penn State in year 5, this is 1990, as a full professor, division chief, and since he was the only guy there for 6 months, the call schedule was quite easy to construct. Tom developed a first-class division and after 4 years was named as the department chair at age 42. As he did with the Division of Pediatric Surgery, Tom revamped the department into a successful academic program. A new challenge came calling in 1998. Stanford had been through more department chairs and deans in a short period of time than any academic center in the US. They wanted someone to right the ship. I, along with many other surgeons, thought Tom was crazy for considering this position, let alone taking the position. He saw it as a tremendous opportunity, so he packed up and moved 3 teenagers to California between semesters in 1998. And I think we can certainly say that he was not a candidate for Father of the Year award that spring. I think the girls in the front row would agree. Tom has been chair at Stanford for over 15 years. When he arrived, the department's annual budget was a meager $18 million, and they were incurring annual losses of about $5 million. The current 2015 budget is approximately $80 million, with a $7 million surplus. I'd like to list just a few of his accomplishments as chair at the Stanford Department of Surgery over the past 15 years. He's recruited a little over 100 faculty, nearly 30 of them with endowed chairs. Research budget increased by 500%, from number 32 to number 9 nationally for departments. The surgery residency program when he arrived was going on probation, and now it's easy, one of the top 10 in the country. He built the Goodman Simulation Center, which ultimately birthed the entire School of Medicine Simulation Center. He created the first surgical biodesign program. Now in its 14th year, a plethora of innovators have been nurtured, papers written, textbook published, and a dozen startups spawned. This work also led to appointments for Tom on Tom Fogarty's Institute Board and the International Scientific Community at ERCOT. Over the years, Tom's pursuit of golf and cycling was increasingly hampered by a bum knee. At age 60, he underwent a knee replacement, then trained for 14 straight months, and then rode his bike across the country from Santa Barbara to North Carolina. Why did he do this? It was a means of physical and mental rehab, as well as an example of balance to colleagues and residents. And here he is with the Atlantic Ocean in the background at the so-called finish line. Among his many hobbies are traveling, pictured here with Susie and with Tuscany in the background, and cooking. And the kitchen has long been a Krummel family focal point. It is important to mention that Tom and Susie will be celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary this June. Congratulations, Tom and Susie. Tom is a great listener and is generous with his time, advice, and emotional support. He is a role model for those who wish to help others in need by using their trained hands, their inquisitive minds, and most importantly, by promoting balance in one's life. There is a leadership adage that goes like this: if you think you are leading, but no one is following, then you are simply out for a walk. Tom, this adage does not apply to you. You have been a leader in American surgery for several decades, and with poise, dignity, and a zeal to advance our field, you have led our esteemed society as president for the past year. It is a great honor to introduce the 45th president of the American Pediatric Surgical Association, Dr. Thomas Krummel.
Thank you all so much. And Dr. Albanese is not only generous, but hyperbolic. Members and guests of APSA, colleagues and friends, I'm deeply grateful for the privilege of serving as your president. There are probably 100 others in the audience that are at least as deserving. I get it. I understand the role of chance and good fortune in such awards, and so again, my profound thanks. In his intro, Craig graciously omitted missteps, mistakes, and flat-out screw-ups that you don't have a place to put in your CV. The veterans in the organization understand that, but I think it's so important that the young people hear that. But it is those missteps, mistakes, and screw-ups that actually form a pretty interesting area to dig into, and that became the inspiration for this address. And luckily, I know something about missteps, mistakes, and screw-ups. As we start off, I feel very much like the proverbial turtle on a fence post. When you see one, you know that the turtle didn't get there on its own. As such, I owe a deep debt of gratitude, both professionally and personally, to many. I'll try to enumerate a few. Over 40 years in 5 institutions, I've been privileged to come across a host of incredible students, residents, fellows, and faculty at Medical College of Wisconsin, Virginia, Children's in Pittsburgh, Penn State, and for the last 15 plus years at Stanford. I'm truly grateful, and each of them has made an imprint. The many professional colleagues and friends at APSA and on the surgical boards and societies that I've been privileged to serve, again, have taught me a great deal. And finally, my patients and their families have taught me courage. There's one guy who spans both personal and professional, Arnold Salzberg, an early member of APSA, an icon, a mentor, and a friend. I'm one of Arnie's 12 disciples, 12 that he inspired to pediatric surgery. Salzberg and the 12 disciples. Arnie's laughing. True story. I'm a junior resident on ped surgery at MCV in '79. Really been a lousy week. We had 2 beautiful 4-kilogram babies with diaphragmatic hernia. Great operation. And then we watched them die. None of the Wednesday's tremendous critical care session, none of those tools were available to us. The following week, Bob Bartlett shows up, a young hotshot, and gives a research conference on a newfangled technology, ECMO. After the talk, Arnold rivets me with his gaze and says, "Hey, Krummel, how many more kids are we going to watch die?" With his full support and Laser Greenfield's, as Craig indicated, we started a little ECMO team. It was a ragtag bunch, and at the surgical section, we presented a early report of some success, and Arnold says, "Bartlett proved ECMO could be done, Krummel proved anybody could do it." Love that guy. There's a Salzberg Award for mentorship at the AAP. There's a good reason for that. Here is that young hotshot, RHB. Bob taught me the joys of the intersection of surgical science and engineering. We've been friends and colleagues for 35 years, and he's been nothing but incredibly gracious with his time, energy, and enthusiasm. And that intersection of surgical science and engineering has persisted with me now for 35 years. I've got 2 big brothers in the field, the guys you wanted to grow up like. Mike Harrison and Jay Vacanti. Each of them created entirely new fields we'd never thought of before, fetal intervention and tissue engineering. In the beginning, they did it through thought and then through action. In the beginning, they did it single-handedly. Later, as Pied Pipers, they've trained a generation. I count myself lucky to have known both of them, and I regard each of them as one of my closest friends. The move to Hershey was done for one single reason, the opportunity to work with John and Marion Waldhausen. They were the original dynamic duo. John was the founding chair at Penn State. We're seen pictured here with Dr. Francis Moore at the Waldhausen lecture in '96. John knew how to run a department, and in the course of having me run the division. He taught me how to be a department chair, and then for the next 5 years helped me do that. Those were priceless lessons for the move to a troubled department at Stanford. Since I've been in Silicon Valley, I've been privileged to work with two extraordinary surgeon, inventor, innovators. Tom Fogarty you know or have heard of. Rodney Perkins you probably haven't. But you talk about translational medicine. The two of these in aggregate have developed 50 successful medical technology startups, creating more than $3 billion worth of value. More importantly, more than 10 million patients have been treated with their inventions. 10 million patients affected by their work. And their lesson has been consistently one of embrace the exploration of new therapies and expect to fail along the way. Expect to fail. My parents taught me everything that was important long before I got to school. They taught me that you didn't need a lot to have a lot. I was really blessed with terrific two brothers and a sister Sue, and my sister Sue and her husband joins me here today. Thanks so much for coming, babe. Yeah. Finally, my family, the ultimate blessing, spectacular in every way. My wife Susie and our three treasured children, all of whom are here. I'm so grateful. The kids and Susie help me stay grounded. They eat my cooking even when it's not very good. They laugh at some of my jokes, and the girls only occasionally roll their eyes when Dad offers some advice. Right? In short, they make everything worthwhile, and it is these family foundations that are a reminder on a daily basis of my blessings and also my responsibilities. It's good not to fail at certain decisions. Marrying my wife was the best. Thanks, Susan. Okay, let's get started. Got that done. This picture is the opening picture of the presentation. It is the most famous painting of a physician ever done, entitled simply The Doctor. And for all of us at APSA, it depicts a physician puzzling over a sick kid. Perfect. What was the state of our ability to take care of children with surgical diseases at that time? The then surgeon extraordinaire pontificated, "The abdomen, the chest, and the brain will forever be shut from the intrusion of the wise and humane surgeon." An awful lot has changed since then. How'd that happen? Why? In point of fact, the history of surgery of all sorts is always about innovation. It's always about disrupting what we can't do today. And it doesn't matter whether it's a diagnostics, supportive care, monitors, tools, devices, technologies, or procedures. Depicted here was the first surgical tool I was privileged to help work on. That's a 5mm vessel sealing device that seals, and cuts in the middle and enables us to do complex laparoscopic and thoracoscopic operations. But progress is also always about failure. Entire fields have been created out of serial failures. The fields of solid organ transplantation, cardiac surgery, and laparoscopy are replete with troubles, missteps, refocuses, and lessons learned. Ditto with the development of devices. Those of us that were around in the early days of staplers remember the stapler that would fire. It would cut, but the staplers didn't fit. This picture of a cardiac valve was modeled out of a soda bottle stopper. Got that from a hardware store, a soda bottle stopper, and it was put in a human being. It worked. That's the Starr-Edwards valve. Today, our obsession with success blinds us to this reality that the failure that both Dr. Farmer and Dr. Bessner talked about in their presentations is really part of the game. And in order to discover what works, we've got to plow through a lot of what doesn't work. And in point of fact, the lessons of failure inform subsequent successes, and I'll argue indeed are essential. A word about the title. Samuel Beckett was an Irish playwright who was a profound pessimist, not like me, Nobel laureate, and wrote a play you might have seen, Waiting for Godot. More pertinent to today, he wrote a parody of Westward Ho called Worstward Ho, and in it the line was written, "Ever tried, ever failed? No matter, try again, fail again, fail better. I had an alternate title called the F word. I was a little concerned how that would reference in PubMed, and so decided to go with the current title. But I'm reminded, and have been thinking about this broadly, because this photo is in the hallway between the locker room and the Stanford operating room. I don't know if it's there as a joke or a reminder, or just, but it is, and it again reminds us of our responsibilities. So I have 4 simple objectives in this presentation. Number 1, to systematically observe the lessons of failure in surgery, athletics, and medical technology innovation. That happens to be what binds those interests of mine together. Secondly, to try to draw generalizable knowledge from failure as a gateway to success. How can we learn from it and be better at it? 3, to explore the role of what Louis Pasteur called the prepared mind. And 4, to review what I'll regard as 4 key megatrends to inform where we should, in the coming years, try again, and fail better. This is a highly personal and inherently risky presentation, and I fully accept that it may be prone to failure, but here we go. So we're going to start with discussion of failure with Robert Gross. Now, certainly the veterans in the audience are saying, how could we possibly start a discussion of failure beginning with Robert Gross, the first president of the American Pediatric Surgical Association, founding father of the field, the first to ligate adductus, the first to develop aortic homografting, the author of the biblical textbook. How could we consider Dr. Gross? I first met Dr. Gross figuratively with his picture that's on the wall in Dr. Salzberg's office and his well-worn book that's in Dr. Salzberg's office. I then visited Dr. Bartlett, Dave Collins, and others. Same book, same picture. I thought, whoa, okay, this guy must be a demigod. What would he know about failure? Turns out more than a little. He didn't match in surgery. He applied only to the University of Minnesota. He wanted to go work with Wangenstein. He forgot to apply to the MGH and the Brigham, and as a result, he didn't match in surgery. He decided to abandon surgery, and he began a pathology residency with Bert Wolbach at the Brigham. Later, when Dr. Hendren and Dr. Folkman wrote a tribute, they made the observation about how important this was because he was surrounded by both the surgical specimens and the autopsy material. He really understood the anatomic problems that we are faced with as pediatric surgeons. Who better to be able to fix them than someone with that experience? And in his seminal textbook is the inscription to S. Bert Wolbach. So I took all this in and I sent a letter to Dr. Gross in Brattleboro, Vermont. I found his address in the SUS address book, and I said, Dr. Gross, you don't know me from Adam, I'm just a dumb PG-3, but your book and your picture are everywhere. Your students have made profound contributions, and your students, me, still benefit, and so as such, your legacy is stunning. And it's a lesson from my mother, write notes. 2 weeks later, there's a letter in my mailbox, postmarked Brattleboro, Vermont. Who do I know in Brattleboro, Vermont? A letter from Dr. Gross. Dear Dr. Krummel, it gave me much pleasure to have your warm and good note from you. I'm glad that my old residents tell some of the nice things that happened on my old service, and at the same time omitted some of the troublesome times which I should have handled in a better manner. He goes on to talk about how grateful he was for the opportunity to work with the trainees and that simultaneously caring for patients, and as he says, the lifting up of young men and women were all part of the great joys of his professional career. He ends with, I'm certainly conscious of the far greater burden that all of you currently bear, but I sincerely hope that you get a full share of satisfaction in dealing with patients and also the lifting up of young men onto the ladder of progress. My kindest personal regards, Robert E. Gross. Please excuse my scribble, no secretaries or typewriters up here. One of my treasured pieces of memorabilia, but look what he wrote. Omitted some of the troublesome times I should have handled in a better fashion. Here's a good one, story retold to me by Dr. Hendren and Dr. Schamberger. A trainee was speaking to Dr. Gross and said, how do we manage patients with sacrococcygeal teratoma? Dr. Gross says, it's in the book. And the trainee says, Dr. Gross, it's not in the book. Gross searches and discovers that the missing chapter is behind a heater register in his office. What else? Dr. Gross missed an opportunity, and he has freely admitted it. A cardiologist, Helen Tausig, made the suggestion that, you know, these kids with tetralogy of Fallot, when their ductal murmur goes away, no ultrasound, just when their ductal murmur goes away, they go to hell. So she said, can't we make a ductus to support and sustain patients with tetralogy? Dr. Gross dismissed the idea. He'd made a career ligating ductuses. Why would you ever want to make one? But interestingly, Al Blaylock didn't, and the rest is history. Working with Helen Tausig and Vivian Thomas, Blaylock electrified the world with the beginnings of the next step in the history of cardiac surgery. But where did Blaylock's idea come from? First of all, from a prepared mind, because he had done the experiment. In Blaylock's own words, while on the faculty at Vanderbilt in 1938, I became interested in pulmonary hypertension. I thought it might be possible to produce by subclavian to pulmonary artery anastomosis. Much to our disappointment, it failed. The key piece of information that allowed systemic to pulmonary shunt as an operation was a failed experiment. Blaylock's looking pretty cocky and pretty good here in this picture at around the time of the 1000th Blaylock-Tausig shunt. But what really happened? From the horse's mouth, Bill Longmire was the senior resident, and he recounts these early days. I learned of Dr. Blaylock's desire to oxygenate the blood by some extrapulmonary means. Tests were made injecting oxygen intravenously. That must have been interesting. Intraperitoneally or directly into tissues. All these methods seemed ineffective. Fail, fail, fail. Blaylock then, again Longmire speaking, seemed to be rather depressed for several weeks. I became quite aware of several major operations which he attempted that had not been successful. Fail. Each failure seemed to provoke an accumulated depressive emotional reaction. It gets worse. Again, Longmire, I must say my enthusiasm for the idea, systemic pulmonary shunt, completely disintegrated as I saw the frail cyanotic infant in the O2 tent on East Ward of Harriet Lane. The first case was done, successful, electrified the world and advanced the field of congenital heart surgery. But as Dr. Ravitch recounts in his papers of Al Blaylock, the patient load was heavy, mortality was at first considerable, and at times there would be a series of consecutive deaths hard to bear. Everyone in the audience in pediatric surgery understand Cameron's HAIGHT'S experience, first guy to successfully solve the problem of esophageal atresia. But look at Dr. HAIGHT'S experience. First of all, 5 deaths in a row. Who would get up out of bed the next day to do case number 6? And it didn't get easier. The numbers there, these are not mortality, these are survival. In 1941, it was a 66% mortality. It didn't get better in 42. It was only 43 when it became a 50% mortality. So for those that take thoracoscopic esophageal atresia repair for granted today, think back on that experience, that series of failures. Tom STARZL, privileged to work with him in my 2 years in Pittsburgh. Again, the icon, right? Presidential Medal of Science, an unbelievable surgeon. They named one of the streets in Pittsburgh Tom STARZL Way, and here he is pictured with Hank Bonson skateboarding. STARZL had this wonderful impish spirit. But here he is pictured in his office in the University of Colorado, and he recounts the many dark days in his autobiography, The Puzzled People. Chapter 11, The Failed Liver Transplant Trials. Quote, a pall settled over the liver program. No more patients were entered for more than 3 years. It got worse. He developed hepatitis and got fired as chair of the University of Colorado. Fortunately, he was recruited to Pittsburgh. Hank Bonson resurrected his career, and thus the field of transplantation. Here's a personal screw-up. Craig was good enough to talk about the early ECMO days. This is the first ECMO patient. Background is 81, I'm a PG3. The big baby with meconium aspiration met AA gradient criteria of 650 for 12 hours. That's pretty sick. The patients arresting, attendings unavailable. One out of town, and one had the worst case of poison ivy, couldn't get gowned or gloved. So it's me and the ECMO team, 2 dog lab techs and 1 NICU nurse, my wife. Close-up picture of this child will show a right carotid cannula, but a left internal jugular cannula. Now, why the heck would that be? Because I shredded the right internal jugular vein trying to put it in. The veterans in the audience will remember the days of chest tube cannulation, and someone was pumping on the kid's chest while I'm trying to put the tube in. I have no earthly idea how I dug the thing out of the neck, stopped the bleeding, and I thought, well, I got nothing else to do but go to the other side. That kid and the next 5 survived. And then we had 3 mortalities. You can only imagine if a surgery resident had had 3 mortalities in a row, how the story might have been different. But again, as Salzberg pointed out, Krummel proved anybody could do it. Those 6 survivors are now in their early 30s, and the occasional email is always priceless. I told this story to Dr. Randolph when we were riding through Nashville. We had a rest day, and so I was privileged to have lunch with him. And Dr. Randolph said, you know, Tom, the good Lord looks out for ne'er-do-wells, drunks, and young surgeons. And I had no earthly, I just said, yes, sir, Dr. Randolph. I didn't know which group I was in, or maybe several groups. But again, a priceless opportunity in one of our former presidents and giants. Failure in athletics is axiomatic. If you go to any serious gym, track, field, pool, or stadium in the world, athletes force themselves to failure and then beyond. Many of you may recognize Roger Bannister. He was favored to win the 1,500 meters at the '52 Olympics, and he finished 4th. He was quoted as saying, "I'd let down the nation." 2 years later, he stunned the world when he ran the first sub-4-minute mile. He was a medical student at the time, and he later recounted being defeated and feeling that I'd let people down is what led me to go on. I would not have run 3:59.6 if I'd won the gold medal. Fail again, try again, fail better. The value beyond was recounted by now Sir Roger Bannister in his comments. He said, only in something like running can finality be achieved, the sort of finality that's almost perfection. Yet to achieve perfection in one thing, however small, like running, makes it possible to face the uncertainty and the more difficult problems of life. Here, when he was knighted, and here is Brain and Bannister's clinical neurology book, he became one of the most prominent neurologists in England. What does Michael Jordan have to say about failure? Best guy to ever play the game.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games.
Lost 300 games.
26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
Craig mentioned the ride across the country. That started in failure. In 2007, I tried to do a simple one-day ride. It was 129 miles and was 5 monster mountain peaks, but nonetheless, I crashed. I only finished 2 peaks at 70 miles, and I was sleeping for days. Poorly trained, prepped, predictable failure, and the only souvenir I had, this is a pro rider, not me, mine was worse, was a gigantic hematoma on the thigh. So when I decided to ride across the country, sort of for fun, it's a big country, as it turns out, and there's stuff in the way, you know, that you gotta go across. And so I thought, well, okay, just like in surgery and athletics, you gotta prep, and it's really not about the will to win, but the will to prepare to win. Legendary Green Bay Packers coach Vince Lombardi. So I said, okay, I'm gonna try to do this. So as Craig said, 14-month plan, pretty rigorous, spend a lot of time. Get someone that knows how to help, and Scott Safer was the coach that helped me do this. And one of the things that impressed me about his website was he said, we'll spend a lot of time on mental preparation. I thought, okay, I get that. So the first time I met him, he said, Krummel, what do you think's the toughest distance on the ride across America? And then he answered his own question, the 8 inches between your ears. Okay? Works. The last conversation we had before I took off with him, now after 14 months of working together, was when you think you're going to quit, remember the lessons of surgical training. It works back and forth. We were pretty happy when we got to the Atlantic. This is one of my friends who was riding a rental bike. No one would ever ride your bike in salt water. Right, Charlie? Damn right, okay. What does NASA think of failure? Just to look around, they hate it, they never forget it, and they learn from it. The Board of Governors retreat was in Houston this past January, and Secretary Mary Brandt organized a spectacular opportunity for us to tour the Houston Space Center. 4 by 6 foot wall-sized thing with pictures of the Apollo, Challenger, and Columbia astronauts who died because of NASA's failures. They never forget. I had the privilege to speak with Andy Grove, the retired CEO of Intel, when I was trying to convince him to do the Fogarty Lecture. And in the course of getting acquainted, he said, well, what brought you to Silicon Valley and to Stanford? And I told him that, you know, Dr. Albanese thinking I was crazy notwithstanding, I really had this epiphany that I wanted to go there and see what I could do. And I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I didn't go. So he said, okay, fine, what are the key successes for factors in Silicon Valley? Kind of, what does this guy know about the place? And I said, I read your book, Intellectual Capital, Financial Capital, and a very flat hierarchy. The fact that Andy Grove would have a conversation with me, pretty special. He then said, you know, you missed one, risk capital, the same thing that brought you here. Failure, yeah, you know, it's good if you can avoid it. It's certainly part about the willingness to risk failure and then mitigate it. His Fogarty Lecture was an absolute classic, and in 2006, he prophesied that healthcare on the basis of technology would shift left. And later in the presentation, I'll show you how he's exactly right. Guy's unbelievable. Our biodesign program, Craig again was gracious to talk about the successes in our manifesto. We believe the process of innovation can be taught, and our goal is to train med tech innovators and inventors. Indeed, over 15 years now, we've had 750 invention disclosures and patents, multiple abstracts, a second edition, real-world funding success, 32 startups. We've created 810 jobs, 135 grads, 8 rookies, 18 other biodesign programs worldwide. But in the end, for surgeons, it's about what gets a patient better. We've treated more than 250,000 patients with biodesign student technology leverage. But the whole process of getting there has been replete with failure. Here's how that looks. We had this idea, my silly idea, that a multifunctional laparoscopic tool might look like a pen with blue, green, and red ink. And we mocked it up, and it would be a great tool. It'd be about 3 centimeters in diameter. It's not much of a laparoscopic tool when it's got to be about 5 millimeters in diameter. We're off by almost an order of magnitude. We then said, well, maybe the pump action on a shotgun would be cool. We'd blow a tip down with CO2. We'd suck it back with a magnet. And then I realized, you know, it's got to cost $50, and it's got to work every time, or surgeons like us will get ticked off. We then said, well, what about side by side? Could be small. And then one of the genius engineers, Zach Malcano, said, you know, if we made a box hinge that pivoted, in one attitude the device would grasp, rotated 90 it would cut, electrify it would be scissors. We have a 5 millimeter, 3-functional laparoscopic tool, failing to success. Matt Callahan, a surgery resident that worked with us, was the recipient of the Invention of the Year Award, Popular Mechanics in 2010, an inexpensive portable ventilator that would work all over the world. In one slide, I'm showing you 4 years of sequential failures, from this doesn't really work, this doesn't fit in the box, this is too clunky, the battery won't work, to now clinical trials in India as we speak. This is a surgery resident experience. James Walls was on loan to us from UCSF, now a pediatric surgeon. They watched a patient of mine with a pectus. We were going to do a NUS. An awake patient with a 45-minute epidural catheter thrash. The surgeons in the audience get it. Kid bent over the Mayo stand, sticking a needle in his back, kid thrashing around. You know, it's not pretty. How many in the audience have ever seen an epidural failure? Just show me your hands, right? Good, okay, right. Now, How many of us have ever done anything about it? We don't. We just do the next case. So from our perspective, the ability to put a team on it of engineers, device design people, and a surgery resident, we can do something about it. They filed 3 provisional patents, all the funding, all based on a very clever idea, the 5,000-year-old machine called a screw. So instead of pushing it in, you screw it in. This is the original recording of how they thought about it. And then they went to, they went to the butcher store and Ace Hardware. They got a lamb spine, and they got a screw that we thought was about the right size, and very quickly prototyping fast demonstrated that this could work. Fast forward with lots of effort, more, yes, no, this won't work, fail, 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 no, no, no. Voila, 5 years later, the vision now with ultrasound, anti-navigation, perfect control, 5 years worth of sequential failures to, we think, changing the game in epidural anesthesia, all because of a patient of mine and a team that took the problem. The F word is finally getting some respect. Trinity College in Dublin had a Science Center exhibit this spring. I couldn't go, but one of our fellows was doing a visit to Dublin, so they went to the failure demonstration, and there on the wall is the title of our talk, Ever Tried, Ever Failed, No Matter, Try Again, Fail Better. I learned something from their visit because they came back with this picture of a Formula One race car axle failure at more than 200 miles an hour. Adjacent to this picture was the quote, fail fast and fail cheap and fail often, but fail in a way that doesn't kill you. Okay? That made sense to me. Fortunately, the driver was not hurt. This, in many ways, this fail fast, fail cheap echoes. We thought this was brand new, but as I've researched this, the basic principles were outlined by Peter Palczynski, a capable civil engineer in Russia. He was incredibly critical of the moonshot project failures, the giant dams and factories in the Russian economy. Stalin executed him for thinking too much. That's the problem with a boss that functions like Stalin. But his principles of try new things, expect some will fail, make failure survivable, safe spaces and small steps, and know when and how you failed and learn, really become in many ways the blueprint for how this can work. So I hope that I'll at least argue, and I'm not going to take any questions, that objective 1 and 2, by way of conclusion, success often begins with failure. It's routine across surgery, athletics, and med tech, though we don't talk about it enough. It really isn't about failing, but it's about learning how to fail well. Fast, cheap, don't get killed, adapt and learn. Mindset matters. Why was Gross, Haight, Blaylock, and Starzl so persistent? And it begs the larger question in science, why are some people so lucky? How is Gail Bessner able to give, or Diana Farmer able to give such a spectacular presentation yesterday? It's not luck. It is the prepared mind. And prepared minds have really been the ones that have made the impact in our field. Paré, at the siege of Turin, ran out of oil, so they could no longer apply boiling oil to wounds, which was therapy of the day. Instead, they used soap and water. Voila, we totally changed the way we think about wound care because of the inability to do the standard stuff. Daguerre invented photography only because mercury vapor contaminated the space where he was trying to develop pictures, and he ultimately figured out it was the mercury vapor. We've heard the discussion of Fleming and penicillin from our speaker, Dr. Rose, this morning. Goodyear, by accident, had sulfur mixed with rubber, and it finally became usable, the process of vulcanization. Here's a good one. Percy Spencer's an engineer who was testing the magnetron, and he noticed the chocolate bar in his pocket kept melting. Most of us would have put the chocolate bar someplace else. He discovered the magnetron, which is the core element in a microwave, which heats our food in our kitchens everywhere. Chance observation, we all make them, most of us ignore them. The prepared mind pays attention. Louis Pasteur, unbelievable contributions, a chemist, a biologist. He really built what we currently today understand in terms of pasteurization for beer, wine, and milk. He saved the French silk industry by solving the riddle of parasites. He was the original guy, again with Dr. Rose's discussion of vaccination, to think about how we might immunize against cholera and anthrax, and he's either the luckiest scientist in the history of the world, or maybe he knew something. And when he was made dean at the University of Lille, pictured here now as the Institut Pasteur, he commented, in fields of observation, fortune, he doesn't call it luck, fortune favors only the prepared mind. In his own word, Pasteur says and reminds us, imagination should give wings to our thought, but we always need decisive experimental proof. When the moment to draw conclusions and interpret gathered observations, imagination must be checked and documented. In other words, believe what you see, don't see what you believe. If what you're seeing doesn't make sense, that's probably the time to pay attention, the chance to seize on the unexpected moment. Is it accident or prepared mind in the unnatural nature of science? Wolpert writes, scientific research is based not on chance, but on highly focused thoughts. It's not by chance that it's always the great scientists who have the luck. We are all surrounded by innumerable facts and accidents. The scientist's skill, or anyone's skill to interpret the most important ones, is what makes you lucky. So, what's the prepared mind? We're interested in trying to encourage this, certainly part of the biodesign program. And so, can we understand a prepared mind? Can we encourage it? Can we nurture it? Could we even teach it? Sometimes it's worth coming at things backwards. So here are some examples of unprepared minds, or what I've termed low intellect in high places. This is the Commissioner of Patents in 1899 who recommended the office be closed because, quote, everything that can be invented has been invented. The horse, an investment banker. The horse is here to stay, the automobile only a novelty, a fad. What use could this company make of an electric toy? Telephone. Man will never reach the moon regardless of all future scientific advances. Look at the credibility of these people who are saying this stuff. Father of radio, 2 years later, we're on the moon. And of course, where we started, the abdomen, the chest, and the brain, the surgeon extraordinaire. I always like to say we have no one officially titled the surgeon extraordinaire at our shop, but a lot of self-titled surgeon extraordinaires. So I will suggest to you that there's a truism. If a senior scientist or surgeon says something's possible, probably is possible. They know something. If a senior scientist or surgeon says something's impossible, then it's likely. Jim Collins, who's a graduate lecturer at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and has really influenced our thinking a lot on creativity in the biodesign program, you may know him through his books, Good to Great and Built to Last, wrote a really interesting study on how decline and failure happens, and he studied the failure sequentially of Bank of America, Hewlett-Packard, Merck, and Motorola. And he makes the observation when failure starts, great enterprises that have been insulated by successes lead to poor decisions and lost disciplines. People become arrogant and regard success as entitlement and lose sight of the underlying factors of success. They lose the prepared mind. He goes on to say, luck and chance play a role in many successful outcomes, and those who fail to acknowledge the role of luck may have played and thereby overestimate their own merits and capabilities have succumbed to hubris. Again, a comment that Eric Rose made this morning. So 2 experts who got it right. Paul Lauterbur, a Nobel laureate. You can write the entire history of science in the last 50 years in terms of papers rejected by Science and Nature. And finally, our own Judah Folkman, when I was interviewing for a surgical or ped surgery fellowship, Dr. Folkman said to me, you know, Tom, there are no experts in the future, just experts in the present. Why don't you be sure that you become an expert in the future? 4 times I had the privilege to write a letter nominating Dr. Folkman for the Nobel Prize, the last one just before his tragic death. I like to think the 4th might have been John. So how do we promote the prepared mind? We kind of know what it doesn't look like. Wall Street Journal is a great place to read. One of the key reading lists for those that are want to expand their view of the world. An enormous focus in the business world on creativity, discovery, invention, and innovation. It becomes an essential skill. What's the best strategy when you're stuck, when you're puzzling over something and you really can't get to the answer? How do you increase the likelihood of an aha moment? Well, people have done studies to ask Picasso. It's hard to talk to Archimedes, but when he was puzzling over a shape or an artistic form, what did he report? Ditto Einstein, and they uniformly say, first I was stuck. I'd racked my brain, it wasn't coming to me. The aha moment frequently comes outside the active search, and they both commented that it's shockingly obvious and complete in the moment, and there's an accompanying certainty that I know I'm right. How does that happen? It all starts with the problem. So again, back to the janitorial days and Craig's observation, yeah, be grateful for your problems. Not only is it what we pay you for, but it may be the way you make a breakthrough. Whether Archimedes was trying to figure out the gold crown composition or Descartes was doing coordinate geometry, the story there is he's lying on his back in bed watching flies fly around the room. And it suddenly occurred to him that, you know, we could do an X, a Y, and a Z coordinate and define where that fly was at any point in time. Taking a nap. Pasteur's silkworm disease, Judah Folkman's tumor vessel puzzle, your current problem. Don't be afraid of the impasse. What can you do about it? Here, just to keep everyone awake, is a simple problem. I want you to think with me for a minute. I want you to move one line on this equation, Roman numeral 4 equals Roman numeral 3 plus 3, to make the equation true. And most of you with your left brain will say, oh yeah, come on, Krummel, that's not that hard. Move that one there, right? So indeed, move that over, great, it's true. Now here's a little tougher one if you haven't seen it. Roman numeral 3 equals Roman numeral 3 plus Roman numeral 3. Now think about it. You can feel yourself kind of, let's see, I'm moving it, I'm bending it, I'm trying to make a V, and it's not working. You'll probably reach an impasse. If you started talking to one another, you might make some progress. Maybe more likely, if you put it aside for a while, you might figure out, here you go, you ready? Move the line. I didn't tell you which line. Okay. Charlie would have gotten it eventually, right? He's telling me he would have gotten it. So what are the conditions to enhance the ability to solve that puzzle or any other puzzle that you're struggling with? Stop concentrating on the details. You got to search more broadly, because if you've hammered at it and you're not getting there, more hammering is not like, you know, it's the old surgical principle, if force doesn't work, use more force. At a certain point in time, that won't work. Now with functional MR studies, we know that daydreaming, a la Descartes or Newton, taking a bath, a la Archimedes, Tesla was walking and Einstein loved to cycle, as ways to think in a more general way to solutions. Here's a paper published from a little institution on the West Coast, Stanford University. Give your idea some lakes, the positive effects of walking on creative thinking. First of all, it is well described that physical activity influences cognition, and it's also well described the global protective effects of aerobic exercise against cognitive decline. It's the most important thing you can do to stay young. The study was designed and well executed to study walking on creativity. There were gains in what we would call ideational fluency, meaning more and better ideas, positive effects on creative thinking and problem solving, more, better, and more broad approaches to the problem, a la that solved the line problem. In general, there was about a 66% increase in creative output, and this was sustained. And most importantly, this is useful for problems that require a fresh perspective. Does that work in the real world? Well, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, you probably know otherwise as 3M. They sell more than 55,000 different products, from touchscreens to Post-it notes. And they have a large research investment, and arguably by intellectual property generated are the third most innovative company in the world, and they've hardwired creativity policies. They have a flexible attention policy. You're allowed to take a walk outside, play ping pong. They have a 15% rule where speculative new ideas can be researched, but you must share with colleagues. I'll show you why in a minute. And they're a for-profit company that have been 75 years in existence, long before Google had their own 20% rule. Here's the Post-it note story. Arthur Fry was a paper engineer and happened to sing in a choir, and during his 15% time, he attended a tech forum where an adhesives engineer was talking about, I got this really weak glue. Really, stuff doesn't stick together very well. And everyone is scratching their head saying, well, what would you ever use a weak glue for? We want glue to be strong. The hymnal pages in the church choir where Fry sang in were often marked with paper scraps. And of course, they periodically fall out. So Fry is daydreaming during the sermon and literally again describes that, aha, I got a use for non-sticky glue. Within 6 weeks, prototypes have been shared, played with, jotted notes, and Post-it notes are now something we couldn't live without. So, object 3, the prepared mind. Pasteur was right. Fortune does favor the prepared mind. Minds are like parachutes. They only function when they're open. Success-fueled hubris is fatal, typically because you've lost a prepared mind. And finally, and most importantly for us, privileged places for discovery, invention, innovation share four traits: a learning environment of openness, a cross-disciplinarity, hard work and free think time, and playful time, physical exertion, and some outdoor activity. Think about that when you make your own life plan for the next year, or think about how you're going to manage your division or your department. So now I want to move to objective 4. Where should we think about trying again? Where is it worth failing some more at in the coming years? It's always good to talk to someone that has some experience, and in the very famous book by Sir Peter Medawar, Advice to a Young Scientist, he comments, "It can be said with complete confidence that any scientist of any age who wants to make important discoveries must study important problems," very much like the program committee presented us today and over this APSA meeting. Dull or piffling problems yield dull or piffling answers. It's not enough that a problem should be interesting. Almost any problem is interesting. But again, when you take a look at our invited speakers, the problems that they've tackled, that is great advice for everyone as we prepare to end the meeting and move on to back home in reality. Here's an interesting problem that now Sir Peter Medawar observed, and you can say these things when you're a knight. The human mind treats a new idea the same way the body treats a strange protein. It rejects it. It's my sincere hope that the new ideas that you've heard here during this APSA meeting, you don't reject. Maybe we can treat appendicitis as an outpatient. Maybe we can approach it differently, a way to solve necrotizing enterocolitis. Don't reject the new ideas. So here's my sort of prognostication from where we should try again, fail again. It has really been my intention in all of the panels and the invited speakers that's the kind of brain stretch that we hopefully got at this meeting. I'll identify 4 selected megatrends. I want to talk a little about workforce, I want to talk about half the sky, the tools of our trade, and ubiquitous computing. First of all, the number of board-certified pediatric surgeons has quadrupled since 1975, quadrupled. The number of complex index cases, the things we define ourselves by, is flat or diminished. Birth rates are low. In 1960, it was 3.5 per woman, 1.89, and in California, it's 1.2. Selective terminations for malformations have changed the spectrum of congenital anomalies and a stable incidence of pediatric tumors. These lines are not hard to figure out. The good news is we got the leadership of our organizations together this past Wednesday, and the concerns about recertification experience and new member case logs I think we can come to address. I would point out that President Oldham's optimal resources work, we've got to have a capable and skilled surgeon. That's, we do know that the de-regionalization that we've all done, the quote outreach that we do for self-preservation, has led to, in pyloric, well demonstrated in pyloric stenosis, appendectomy, and NEC, created worse morbidity and mortality at low volume sites. That's an opportunity, but something that we shouldn't shrink from. Hence, we commissioned the American College of Surgeons ACS workforce. The SHEPS model is going to model us out through 2031, and incoming President Michael Klein is going to make that a major theme. And again, what Keith and Mike and I have tried to do is make sure that we don't have an initiative 1 year and then let it drop. I think some continuity is essential if we're ever going to make progress. This is what my daughters taught me. 2 manifestos well worth reading: Half the Sky, which details the challenges of women in the developing world, and Lean In, the challenges of women in the United States, and we'll call it the developed world. When I gave the Turnberg lecture at WashU in 2011, I did a little research, and I came across this picture of the surgical house staff at Barnes. When Jessie Turnberg showed up without an interview, it was pretty surprising to everybody that Jessie was a she. Can you imagine that? Jessie persisted and has been an enormous beacon of light and a role model to so many of all of us pediatric surgeons. I'll contrast that picture. These are our chief residents from Stanford, 2010, 2011, our finishing class. Tables have turned. We have a token male. And, you know, these were the best. And so that's what we took. And Bethany Slater is now one of our new members, or will be one of our new members in pediatric surgery. So we've come a long way. In 1934, when Harvard went co-ed, the Hasty Pudding Club put on a play called HAIGHT'S, The Ladies. Now the majority of medical students in the US are women. Women are no longer just pediatricians. They're not only obstetricians and gynecologists. 20% of our practicing surgeons becoming a sizable minority of our surgical trainees. I think we still got to think about the glass ceiling. This is a worldwide issue and opportunity, but as the father of 3 daughters, nobody gets it as this generation feminist any more than me. I want to talk about device trends for just a minute. You saw some of this from Jacques Maresco. Devices, I believe, will become increasingly complex, and that has a host of problems associated with it in terms of technical risk and expense. I think we will see merging platforms of rigid and flexible scopes, more image guidance, and the device as procedure. Professor Maresco showed you a couple of tools like this, but this is an automatic sewing device on the end of an Olympus scope. This is an attempt at the so-called endo samurai to get a triangulation in a flexible endoscope. A different device from Boston Scientific. I have no financial interest in any of these, or the Anubiscope. What about the device as procedure? In the innovation panel the other day, there was a question about device autonomy. This Barrett's device automatically produces just the right electric current to ablate the Barrett's mucosa in the distal esophagus. It makes it possible so that the surgeon doesn't screw it up. Maybe we apply this to hernia sac ablation. You could put it in through a laparoscope, close the hernia sac, and be done. Maybe it applies to the gallbladder. Maybe you don't need to take the gallbladder out. You just need to suck it out, ablate the mucosa, and let it shrivel up. Who knows? Time will tell. Last trend, hyperconnectivity. Tom Friedman made the observation, something really big happened in the world's wiring the last decade, but it was obscured. We went from connected to hyperconnected. Facebook, Twitter, 5G iPhones, iPads, ubiquitous and wireless, web-enabled cell phones, the stuff we all use every day, the cloud, big data, cell phone apps, did not exist a decade ago. John Hennessy gave the Fogarty lecture. That was another coup in a fun conversation. He commented that the 2 major trends in computing today, John's a computer scientist, he's also on the board at Google and Cisco, the 2 major computing trends are mobile and social. No longer about, quote, big iron, but it's about what you can carry around, and I'm going to suggest what you can wear. This began to be sort of presaged in Wired Enterprise, another interesting read, Apple's secret plan. Apple's now hiring more software engineers focusing on ultrasound and mobile computing than almost anyone else. It's no longer a memory game, and we're moving well on to what I'll call smart tools, which we've talked about in mobile and social health. Medical students at our shop, operating rooms, throw it in a bag. I'll bring your attention, and I'll just tell one story on Jacques Maresco. So the reason that Professor Maresco couldn't be with us is this picture. This is French President Hollande, and Hollande announced to Professor Maresco that he was coming to IRCAD the same time that Professor Maresco was supposed to be here with us. So Jacques said, "Mon ami, what do I do?" And I said, "Jacques, I'm going with the president of France." Jacques now has developed the first massive open online classroom. More than 1.5 million viewers in 213 countries have watched surgical videos on WebSurge. If you haven't seen it, take a look. It forms the basis for the e-learning initiatives that we've had at APSA over the last several years, not just at the way we do the website and at the meeting, at the Expert CME initiative, PSAP, and our comprehensive online pilot reference. If you look on any of the web applications, there are many, many consumer-facing apps. More importantly, there are now remote sensors and hubs. When I was a resident of Pittsburgh, we had two pulse oximeters in the entire hospital. You can now buy a pulse oximeter. There is a separate shopping page on Amazon for electronic sensors, hubs, connected to iPhones. They will change the way we think about patients, and I'll show you how. I do want to move beyond that to a little bit of focus on what I'll call next generation wearable technologies. I'll call your attention to a sensor here that can sense the movement in a patient with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, helpful in diagnosis. What if you put a stimulator on that and help contract the muscle? These are smart pills with RFID chips inside. You know whether your patient took their medicine or not. Here's a way to automatically translate what you see, and I'll call your attention now to wearable visual computing, currently embodied in Google Glass. It's always good to pay attention to what the military is doing. The Air Force, you get killed if you're in the military. And so they have a high degree of self-preservation associated with what if we could see more, if someone knew where we were, if you knew there was incoming fire with heads-up, hands-free display right up here above your eye. Would that have any use for us? I'm going to show you a video. This is Roger Federer playing tennis. Now, you can't watch Roger Federer as Roger Federer sees, but now you can. I'll suggest to you that it's not just a game. What if you could watch one of our senior surgeons do the perfect Kasai? What if you could see Dr. Kasai do the perfect Kasai? What if you could see Bob Bartlett put a kid on ECMO? I might not have shredded that jugular vein.
Do we have tennis balls?
It's recording. See how focused you are.
So again, don't think tennis, think a master surgeon able to see through their eyes. Watch how fast the game is. I mean, yikes. You get the idea. Second possible application for wearable computing in the operating room. What if you had the World Health Organization checklist in front of your eye? Or if you weren't sure of it, you could look up information in real time. What if you were trying to decide, is a gallbladder Kasai a good idea to do or not, and you couldn't remember? That's probably not such a good idea. You know? You could look it up immediately. You could capture the video of your operation, and you could share it with the world like that. What if you wanted to call a consultant or an expert? You've got a phone built in. I can't show you a surgeon doing this, but I can show you a food truck chef. So again, bear with me with one more video.
Roy Choi, co-founder, straight from LA. Who else would I be? We took a concept that was once reserved
So he's
for
going to
ice
do
cream
a
trucks,
kitchen
hot dog stands,
operation.
turned it into a cultural movement. This happened by challenging the rules of what street food is. And
Challenging the
was,
rules.
Fused it with technology. To me, food is about sharing, and I put every single recipe out there. And what's great
His
about
recipes
Glass is
are
I can
available,
record it,
so could our
share it
operations.
immediately. Maybe that will influence someone else to find their own angle. St. Patrick's Day is coming up. I want to make something special to be served on the trucks. Okay, Glass. Find
You
a
see the
recipe
computer
for
screen in
Irish
his
food.
right upper corner.
Irish
He's
hearty
looking
steak,
up a recipe.
potatoes, braised beef, and cabbage. Take those components and try to
He's
figure
still
out how to
working,
make it feel and taste like LA,
interacting in
but still feel
real
like St.
time.
Patrick's Day. Okay, Glass, record a recipe.
Now
East
he's
Coast leprechaun
recording it.
burrito. So instead of the traditional Irish corned beef, we turned it into a braised carne asada. Place potatoes and a banana. Oh, hold on, I got a phone call. Mom?
This
Mom,
is
I'm busy
cute.
right now.
You don't have to call your mother,
Okay, I'll call you later.
but you
Okay?
might be able
Okay,
to
I love
call
you,
the
I love you.
pathologist and
Bye,
ask him,
bye.
are there ganglion cells?
That's crazy, man.
You might be able to call a referring doctor and tell him what little Johnny had.
Korean cooking. I gotta stay true to the Irish, so we got the leprechaun. And this is what happens when you puree leprechauns. They have no bones. All right, man, we're done.
Guy's
Let's share
hilarious,
this.
yeah. There we
The
go.
Irish tourism board is about to call.
And it's
gonna go on
recorded
every
and
commercial.
shared.
Come to Ireland. It's gonna be like a burrito. I'm Roy Choi, culture clasher, food philosopher, straight motherfucking G.
Okay. Now, there are those that are going to say, that thing is going to be such an annoyance, I would never wear that. No problem. This is the patent now granted to Google for microelectrodes in an ophthalmic electrochemical sensor, a wearable contact lens. This can currently sense blood glucose, no more blood draws. You can imagine the ability to servo any one of a number of things, and if you can put this on a chip, the era of miniaturization, I believe, will allow us to move wearable computing maybe from off our face to onto our eye, and we'll avoid the term Google glass hole. So I think that this era of new wearable computing will change the way we think about our patients. They'll go from inpatients to outpatients. We'll know more about them as outpatients than we know about them as inpatients, and I believe it will be a game changer. In summary, what I've tried to do in this presentation entitled Try Again, Fail Better is 4 things. 1, that the lessons of surgical history, athletics, and medtech innovation show failure as a frequent gateway to success. 2, the lesson is fail well. Fail fast, often and cheap, but don't get killed. The prepared mind is most likely to emerge with the best idea. And finally, I've tried to offer you 4 select megatrends that might direct our efforts. I'll leave you with 2 quick thoughts. 1, my favorite slide, early experiments in transportation. The wheel can be used for personal transportation, and Thor will eventually get a bicycle or a Segway, but the road to those is paved with repetitive failures, and it needs some of us to take notes. Finally, as we finish, for those that think that we're done and surgery is fixed, the art of surgery is not yet perfect, and advancements now unimaginable are yet to come. May we all have the wisdom to live with this with grace and humility, as true it is in 2014 as it was when Halstead wrote it 103 years ago. Again, my sincere thanks for the privilege of serving as your president.